Welcome, everyone. I see people filtering in right now. And thank you so much for joining the Garrison Institute's live interactive webinar. Today, our guests are Dr. Pilar Jennings and Allan Lokos. Dr. Pilar Jennings is a psychoanalyst based in New York City with a focus on clinical applications of Buddhist meditation practice. She has been working with patients and their families in private practice and through the Harlem Family Institute since 2000. Dr. Jennings has been a Buddhist practitioner for the past 40 years and is a teacher of Tibetan Buddhism in the Sakya lineage. She is a visiting lecturer, Excuse me, I have my dog here. At the Union Theological Seminary, Columbia University. She and a faculty member of the Nalanda Institute for Contemplative Science. She has given workshops and retreats internationally on the Buddhist and psychoanalytic approach to trauma. Okay, let me move my. So sorry about that. Okay. Dr. Pilar is a visiting lecturer at Union Theological Seminary, Columbia University, and a faculty member of the Nalanda Institute for Contemplative Science. She has given workshops and retreats internationally on the Buddhist and psychoanalytic approach to trauma, the relevance of spirituality and clinicians, and the unfolding conversation between Buddhist and developmental psychology. She's the author of Mixing Minds and To Heal a Wounded Heart, a psychoanalytic memoir about her entry into clinical work as a Buddhist clinician. Allan Lokos is the founder and guiding teacher of the Community Meditation Center. He is the author of Through the Flames, Overcoming Disaster Through Compassion, Patience and Determination, Pocket Peace, Effective Practices for Enlightened Living, among others. He has been interviewed by the New York Times, CBS Sunday Morning, the Chicago Tribune, in more than 100 radio and television programs. Among the places he has taught are Columbia University Teachers College, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies, the Ribbon Museum, and many others. Allan practiced meditation since the mid-90s and studied with some of the world's most renowned teachers, including Thich Nhat Hanh, Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein, and Stephen Batchelor. Before we begin today's session, I'll go over a few logistical items about our gathering. We're on a Zoom webinar, so participant audio and video are turned off. You'll only see Pilar and Allan, and for the time being, myself. For anyone unable to attend live, we are recording these sessions. You'll have a chance to view these recordings as well as a schedule of upcoming programs at garrisoninstitute.org. We offer these sessions free of charge as a goodwill gesture to support our community during such times of heightened uncertainty. We would welcome donations of any kind to help continue these sessions. Thank you. Finally, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of this gathering. You can post your questions in the Q&A panel, which is accessible at the bottom of your screen by hovering your arrow over the Q&A button. We're on for an hour today and we'll respond to as many questions as we can. Please forgive us if we're unable to get to your question. Thank you again, Pilar and Allan, for being with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Allan is here and Pilar is here. Here we are. Great to see everyone. And Good afternoon, Pilar,
Hello, Allan. Great to be with you. Great
and
to
you as well.
be with you here in the Garrison realm, virtual realm.
Garrison's a place I've been to many times and love it. It's beautiful. Can't wait to get back. But in the meantime, we gather together virtually, as many of us have been doing for, wow, it's at least 5 months now, isn't it? Pilar and I are going to examine a relationship between patience, which is more essential than ever, and perseverance, which also seems to be more essential than ever. And how do we keep them in balance? Well, I'm going to start with patience, just with a little short introduction. I want to introduce you to one of my new teachers, brand new just these last few months. Here's my teacher. So I've been learning a lot from this teacher. I live very close to Central Park, and every day for this period of social distancing, I've spent almost an hour in the park every day. I wear my mask as a friend, and I find that most everyone else is doing the same thing. However, the real teaching comes when I come face to face with someone who is unmasked. I found in the beginning that when I met the unmasked, I didn't do all that well. I had all sorts of feelings come up that strongly resembled anger and annoyance and displeasure. And unfortunately, since my face was masked, I really couldn't express those feelings of anger very well. So I think the unmasked all went by, and it was just sort of a non-event. But it wasn't a non-event for me because I was retaining that annoyance and impatience and yeah, even anger. So I began gradually to realize that I was not going to be able to change anyone else. For me to enjoy my walk in the park, the change was going to have to be within me. And it turned out to be rather easy to do. All I had to do was move out of the way. It's not rocket science, I said to myself, just step out of the way. And lo and behold, my walks became pleasant again. And I found that through the years, developing patience can actually be as easy as that. Not always, and I'm not suggesting that, but a reminder to oneself, this is okay, be patient, figure out a way. The annoyance is within you, I would say to myself. Therefore, the remedy has to also be within me. What do you think, Pilar?
I'm identifying with your example, Allan. This teaching of patience, which probably many of you who are listening know is one of the 6 skillful means, one of the paramitas that the Buddha suggested we need as a kind of roadmap when we're navigating life and all its unforeseen difficulties. And so, Allan, I really appreciate the relevance of your example. Here we are going through this COVID crisis, and for some of us, life has been truly upended, radically changed. For others, it's come with frustrations and irritations. But for us all, it's come with many, many opportunities to understand what patience is, to potentially practice it, and to try to integrate it into our response to this situation. So I might just add to what Allan has said is from a Buddhist understanding, patience is the process of sustaining a relatively undisturbed state of mind in the face of difficulty. So Allan had a whole process, right? He was conscious of his reactivity, and it's human to have all of those feelings, especially if you're feeling threatened, right? And this is an example where there's an imminent threat. And so the Buddha said, well, that's true, right? Being threatened is part of the human experience. Dealing with risk, dealing with difficulty, dealing with unforeseen challenges and loss is part of the human experience. So what can we do to protect our minds as we're making efforts to see our way through? So as a clinician, this teaching is a provocative one because it can sound as though the Buddha was suggesting we should just not get angry, right? That if we're strolling through the park and we're enjoying ourselves and people are walking by and they're chatting and they're unmasked, we should just allow for it and accept it. And so the teaching can seem to suggest a too passive response. But Allan, I really appreciate your underscoring what an active practice patience is, because it really requires us to have a close look at what's happening internally when we're dealing with all of our interpersonal experiences, when we're dealing with this complicated world that we're a part of. So, Allan, I wonder if that notion of patience being an active process resonates with you.
Yes, and it's such an important point because I think that when we think about a practice like patience, we think of, well, just get very calm and don't let anything bother you. And, it kind of can feel a bit like suppression. And it's not meant to be that at all. The truth is that when we speak about working with patients, what we're really doing is we're working with impatience. Because if patience is present, we're fine. There's not really much to have to work with. But it's impatience that we look at. But how do we look at it? When do we look at it? Now, the word mindfulness and the teachings of mindfulness are so overexposed at the moment. In the sense they can't be overexposed, but sometimes I say jokingly that mindfulness has gone viral, but I don't think the practice of mindfulness has gone viral. And mindfulness becomes the big issue because in order to develop greater patience, we need to be able to spot when impatience is arising. And that's all that happens. Impatience is simply a feeling. And one thing that can really help us is that it's an uncomfortable feeling. No one enjoys feeling impatient. So that's a signal that we can notice. Impatience arises. It's going to send this message with it that we're uncomfortable. How do we work with that? One thing that both Pilar and I both happen to really love the work of 8th century teacher Shantideva. And Shantideva used to say, work with small things first. Don't deal with your greatest enemy to start with. Work with little annoyances first. And that really is good advice when we're looking at impatience. Notice the little things that bring about impatience. There is a moment when we have an experience that is a response to a particular event. and the event can be extremely minor. I drop something in the kitchen and it breaks. I become impatient with myself. Or the unmasked person is walking by and impatience arises. If I can approach smaller things and work in that space, the space between the event that has occurred and my response or reaction to that event, it's in that space that I think of patience being born. Without that space, impatience is much more likely to arise. We can call that space, that little moment, a sacred pause, because it really is. It can save annoyance, and if we expand upon that, it can actually save a life. I mean, think of, to be truthful, the harm that you and I have done in those moments when we've not been able to spot our impatience and we've blurted out something or we've acted in a certain way that we've regretted. But there is that moment between the triggering event and our response to that event. It's quick. In one teaching offered by the Buddha, it's called bare experience, B-A-R-E, bare experience. There's nothing else with it but the experience itself. We haven't written a story, we haven't created an add-on. There's just the experience of perhaps annoyance or impatience. If we can be aware of that, then we have that moment to say, I'm okay with this, or I'm not okay with this. Doesn't automatically mean it's fine, doesn't mean that at all. It means I have time to consider how I'm going to respond, if I'm going to respond. Is this the right time and the right place? Am I in the right place to respond skillfully? In other words, not to exacerbate annoyance, suffering, but to speak and act in a way that might alleviate suffering.
Yeah. Thank you, Allan. That sacred space, in my experience, both clinically and spiritually, is really where we're able to be reflective, right? Rather than reactive, rather than feeling pushed around by our experience. And I really appreciate some experiences are profoundly distressing. And so I do want to emphasize that these teachings are not meant to deny just how acutely we can suffer. But they are meant to offer us a way, as you're describing, Allan, to nurture that capacity to remain reflective, even when we're dealing with something quite acute. And I like your point that we need the more benign irritants to practice with, right? We need your example of taking a stroll in a beautiful park and having a lot of space and having the option to move out of the way, so that if we find ourselves in a situation where we can't move out of the way, we have that capacity to dig deep, to access the reflective function, to use a clinical term, when we're dealing with something that may stir strong feelings in response. And the teachings of patience that Shantideva offers are all about working with anger and working with situations that are likely to cause anger. And Shantideva says, let's think this through. Let's think it through very carefully. He really wants us to put on our thinking caps and dissect the logic of our anger. But as a human being and as a clinician, I appreciate we are feeling beings. We have a lot of strong feeling, especially when we're suffering. The challenge, the spiritual challenge, is to have cultivated that sacred space of reflection so that it's always available to us. So that, as Allan is pointing out, we can discern what's going on here, and especially if it's a complex situation, right? What are the many factors that might be hard to see? How might I be adding on to a situation or distorting certain parts of it, including even the good parts, right? Sometimes we need to see the shadow content clearly in order to discern how we're going to respond skillfully. So I love that description of the sacred space. Of course, it's within our minds, within our hearts, that we've been working on, we keep working on. This is, I think, taking us into the realm of perseverance, how to continue that work, right? Especially with the small stuff, so that if we find ourselves dealing with something extreme, which most of us will at some point, we've got what we need to cope. So I wonder, Allan, if it makes sense to begin to tie this to perseverance.
Sure. Pilar, I wanted to add one point to this, which really applies to both. And that is, regrettably, our practice of patience is no guarantee that the other is going to respond in like. I have had a number of experiences, we'll go back to the park for a moment, where my action, which has been to step out of the way, has annoyed people, and they've let me know it. I've been called things that I haven't heard since I was a teenager. And I would think to myself, but wait, I asked nothing of you. I've stepped out of the way, not with any, I'm being inconvenienced. Just, I tried, the more subtly I can step out of the way, the better I feel about it, actually. And yet, I found that it can annoy other people. So I think that we practice for ourselves and we practice for others, but we have to be aware that we are practicing for ourselves and we want to feel good about it. I started using an expression a few years ago: live life as the person you want to be. Practice the way you want to practice, the way it works best for you, the way you end up feeling good when you put your head on the pillow at night. But don't count on reciprocity. You may not get it.
Yeah, that's a critical point. I have found that often there are unconscious beliefs around what needs to happen in order to be non-reactive. I'll be skillful interpersonally if I know I'm going to get a skillful response. And then there are often unconscious beliefs about chucking the whole endeavor if I get a problematic one. So I appreciate, Allan, you're reminding me that there's some trust involved here, that there are going to be healing ripple effects. We may not know how those ripple effects will manifest. It may take some time, but there are healing ripple effects when we are in the world in a way that does no harm. We might, in that moment, to use your example, get a problematic response. And some of our most skillful heroes and mentors got extremely problematic responses as they were speaking truth to power or engaging with collective suffering. But they leave a legacy of healing. And so the Buddha said that's the work. We really have to stay the course so that we don't get lost in what's happening in a given moment.
Well, staying the course certainly is our bridge to speaking about perseverance, isn't it? I was thinking, Pilar, also as you were speaking just now, that part of our work, at least in my own experience, is very much about being able to look truthfully and courageously at our own, let's say, sensitivities. The more modern vernacular might be my buttons that get pushed easily. Working with contemplative practices such as meditation, and very often, certainly was my case, working with professional people like Pilar, so that we can examine and really get a sense, and then we're alert, even before that button gets pushed, that a particular conversation is moving toward that area. And I need to just slow down a bit and become mindful, because I could get triggered here. But it's all within oneself. It's no one else outside of us controls that. And that's the great thing, because there really are no limitations. But to tie this, as Pilar started to do, with perseverance, I was thinking of the word in Pali, the language of the historical Buddha, aditana, which is usually translated as determination, but its quality, its larger quality, is also about perseverance, that ability to stay with it. The key factor from the Buddhist perspective is skillful perseverance, to have the skill to know, yes, I can stay with this, I can hang in there, and also to know, okay, that's enough. I've given this my best and it's not happening, and I see that it's not going to happen. I think of this very much. I love the phrase and the practice of full effort. To know that I have really given something my full effort, and that ultimately becomes more important than the result. Because as we know, so often we just don't get to control the result. But the development of perseverance, to stay the course, to know what the course is, that we feel within ourselves, if we want to just up the ante a bit for a moment, this is a noble cause. This is a worthwhile cause. I want to be involved in this, whether it's my personal growth or the growth within my community or in my country. This is worth doing. This is worth sticking with it. No, I don't necessarily have all the answers, but perhaps with others, we can work out some answers, or at least work out a path. And more often than not, it's going to be challenging. We have a lot that needs to be worked on today. So the idea of perseverance and patience really need to be balanced, so that we, within ourselves, can feel balanced. In the Buddhist tradition, that balance is referred to as equanimity, which is considered to be a rather exalted state.
Yeah. As I was listening to you, Allan, I was reflecting again on Shantideva's work, Bodhisattva's Way, and he describes, as did the Buddha and all the teachers who came after the historical Buddha, that for many of us who are attracted to the Dharma, there's a real curiosity about what we're capable of. There's some part of the mind that is awakening to the possibility of experiencing life with some spaciousness and an engaged curiosity and skillfulness. And Shantideva takes that theme and really cracks it open around our capacity to stay the course, work so steadfastly with our minds, our hearts, our psyches, that we're able to stay awake. Right? This is really what enlightenment is. Right? Not that I've experienced it, but I've had tastes and I've observed in my teachers that ability to stay awake to reality, regardless of what's happening, for the benefit of all. And in the Dharma, that's described as enlightenment mind, or bodhicitta, that wish to be fully awake so that all beings can benefit from your skillful, compassionate nature. And Shantideva makes an interesting distinction between the aspiration to have that bodhicitta and the venturing forth. I will stay the course. I will engage these teachings. I will reflect upon them and really test them out, as the Buddha suggested we do, not to be a passive learner, but to really test out whether or not these teachings help us experience more ease, less anxiety, more love, more freedom, all the things that we long for. And so that venturing bodhicitta, it does require a depth of perseverance, right? A real depth of perseverance. And we all know this, right? If we've ever worked on anything that was deeply meaningful, it requires that part that says, I'm gonna do this, even if it continues to challenge me and be extraordinarily difficult, and even if doubt is arising, which I think is important to consider, because on the spiritual path, there's usually times of extreme doubt. And it seems like other people, they have a feel for enlightenment. I'm remaining basically a neurotic New Yorker. I'm still afraid of going to the grocery store, et cetera, et cetera. The Buddha said, don't worry, don't let the doubt stop you. Keep nurturing your self-esteem. Keep reinforcing that really underneath the neurosis, underneath any trauma history, is extraordinary capacity to deal with reality. But you have to keep trying. You have to keep practicing. You have to just show up again and not let the doubt have the last word.
Yes, Pilar, and as you know, doubt is, in the Buddhist teaching, one of the hindrances, one of the 5 hindrances. But a hindrance isn't something that stops us. A hindrance is something that we can work through. also really significant, and I find with working with students that this is often very useful for them to realize that perfection is not the goal, because perfection would suggest that you reach a certain place and that's it. Well, we're told that the Buddha did, but it was never in terms of perfection. It was in terms of his ability to have extinguished the ways in which he was causing forms of what's called dukkha, or suffering, dissatisfaction, discomfort, etc. So if you couple that with the fact that a characteristic of all things, again, in the Buddhist tradition, is the idea that everything is changing, everything in the moment, right now. So therefore, it's about a journey. It's about our ability to change with all of the change that's going on around us. A year ago, did any of us anticipate what we'd be going through now? Maybe Dr. Fauci did. I don't know. He seems an incredibly bright person, but the rest of us probably not. But how do we change with that? I had an interesting conversation with Rick Hansen, a really well-respected neuroscientist. He's using the term hardwired a lot. And I said, well, Rick, to me, hardwired suggests that that is something that is not going to change. So do we go with hardwired as something that's not going to change? Or is that misleading? Are we really ready to accept that everything is in a state of change? And our perseverance has to be able to go with the change that is happening. Fighting against it is a battle that we lose. So it's an interesting dichotomy, perhaps, that everything is changing and we find a certain stability in the very fact that everything is changing. It's rather odd, isn't it?
Yes. You remind me too that sometimes trust is needed that we will change. It can often seem that we're fated, or we're hardwired, to use Rick's reference, to suffer, to struggle, right? To not get the good stuff, to have repetitive problems. And it can also feel, for all sorts of understandable reasons, that the world, or parts of the world, are changing in a too glacial fashion. And so that teaching of impermanence sometimes is just the succor, the medicine that's needed, right, when we're feeling up against something difficult. So, and here in this pandemic, right, I think we're needing the reassurance that, of course, all of these difficulties we're going through will change. Doesn't mean that we won't experience other difficulties or even increased difficulties, but that we will change with this experience. The world will change. There's nothing static that we're stuck with.
So Pilar, perhaps this is a good place to see if we have some questions and comments.
Great.
And then we'll close with a short practice, if that's okay with you.
Terrific.
So
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
we can.
All right, we have a question from Peter. Allan's example of walking in the park is so wonderful, and a good example of creating space and making a different choice than one might just reacting, by just reacting. Seems as if he reasoned it through. But could Allan and Pilar also talk about feeling the impatience in the body, accepting that, and how to use that in addition to using mental problem-solving skills?
Pilar?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Peter. It's critically important to appeal to the body for help when we're feeling activated. Because you're right, when we're impatient, we're having a cognitive response, we're having an emotional response, but we're also having a somatic biological response. And so rather than trying to think our way through, which is not a bad thing, but it may not be all that's needed, what we can do instead is use our contemplative practice, use mindfulness just to notice what's happening in the body. Are you feeling the contraction in the chest? Is your solar plexus getting squeezed? Is your gut clenched? Are you feeling the tightening in the jaw? And then you can just get to know your body's signals for the experience of impatience or anger or rage or hatred, whatever it might be. And then with the mindfulness to allow for it, right? To be very, very accepting, tolerant. This is what's happening. I'm experiencing something. And I would add as a clinician, sometimes when we're angry, it's an indicator that something important has happened, right? So the body is saying something is going on. And if we are more in connection with the body and we're aware that we're having that reactivity, we can then intentionally, compassionately, patiently help the body begin to recalibrate and decompress by bringing a little bit of energy, warmth, breath into those areas of the body that are holding our experience. Allan, would you like to respond?
Just a quick comment, Peter. Your question is really spot on. In Buddhist psychology, as taught in the Abhidhamma, the teaching says very clearly that every mental and emotional experience that we have will appear someplace in the body. Now, most of us don't pay that much attention to it beyond, oh, I have a terrible headache because I didn't sleep well last night, or because my colleagues in the office are so troublesome at times, so my sciatica is acting up. But it can be so much more subtle than that. Every mental and emotional experience will show up someplace in the body. So sometimes when there's enough time to really work with something that's called a body scan, if we start with the top of the head, it takes a while to become sensitive to this, but we actually can feel sensitivity on the very top of the head. Now, I have an advantage over Pilar, for instance, but and I'm not very good at it either, but I believe it because sometimes I have been able to notice that. But sensations will show any place in the body, and that can be great because that's a signal. Something's going on. Pay attention. Doesn't mean it's bad, and certainly doesn't mean that something is wrong. It just means pay attention. So thanks for the question, Peter.
Thank you. We have a question from Anonymous. How can intention be a part of our perseverance?
Right. Yeah, intention is so emphasized in all Buddhist teachings. It's suggested that really what matters is our intention rather than the result. If we have the intention to help someone out, and it turns out the way we tried to help them created other problems, from a Buddhist perspective, we're all right because we had set the intention, we had a noble intention. And so intentionality is really a key ingredient to our spiritual path. And I would suggest any healing endeavor. In terms of how it links to perseverance, it does matter if we lift what we're after to awareness, which is why most of us need a lot of time to consider what's in our spiritual practice, what's driving us. And this is true of every facet of life. But it's very helpful to try to lift to awareness what we're trying to get. Right? Are we intending to cultivate mindfulness so that we can just feel a little better, which is not problematic? Or are we setting the intention to cultivate mindfulness, skillful, non-reactive way of being, in order to be in this world in a way that reduces harm, in a way that helps other people feel more cared for, more seen, more heard. So I would suggest it's extremely important to try to lift to awareness what we're intending, and that this will help us with perseverance, because we'll then have a frame of reference. If we're up against an obstacle, we'll be able to take some time to reflect on the intention as a way to gear up and carry on.
To add just a note to what Pilar has just said, in the Buddhist tradition, it's said that intention is really the ground of one's karmic imprint. Because again, as mentioned earlier, we often don't have control over results, but we do have control over our intention. Really searching carefully, honestly, and courageously as to what our intention really is often challenging, because we might not really love what our intention really is. We might not feel very proud of it, but really looking at our intention can stop us from saying or doing things that we would later regret. Intention, yeah, as Pilar said, it's just enormous. Just one illustration from my own life. Back a number of years ago, I was in a serious accident. Dramatically, it was a plane crash. And one of the things I had to deal with afterward was that I couldn't walk. And there were these wonderful physical therapists, all explaining very clearly what I had to do. And they would surround me. For some reason, the physical therapists were always rather short, and I'm fairly tall. And they didn't understand why I was so nervous about falling, because if they fell, they didn't have that far to go. But if I fell, it was going to be a big deal. So I was cautious, but I just couldn't do it. I understood what they were saying, and I couldn't put the pieces together. And it was really frustrating. It made me feel like I was a bad student. But I knew one thing: if there was any possibility whatsoever that I could walk, I was going to do it. And they would determine that I could walk. And I stayed with it and stayed with it. And it was frustrating. And Just one morning, I woke up and it was there. I just sort of said, "Oh," and I turned. The therapists weren't even there. I turned around, put my feet down on the floor, and I started to walk, a little shaky. But sometimes we just have to stay with it and stay with it and stay with it. You just never know when the breakthrough moment is going to be there.
Thank you so much. Do we have time for one more question?
Sure. One more, and we'll do a brief practice.
All right. A question from Tom. Is there a particular practice either of you can recommend as a means of cultivating perseverance, similar to how you can use Allan's example of a sacred pause as a means of cultivating patience?
Yeah. I would recommend meditating on the teaching of precious human life. Because in order to persevere, we do have to feel inspired, right? We need some fuel, right? When our spiritual gas tank is running low, we need something that helps us really feel buoyed. And that teaching of precious human life, that regardless of our struggles, our problems, our limitations, our traumas, we all, and I really believe this, we all are endowed with truly remarkable capacities. And if we can nurture our respect for those capacities, if we can really infuse ourselves with some reverence, which is very different from narcissism or grandiosity, but to really nurture the sense that I've got this precious human life. It's true, I do have some problems, but I'm going to keep reinforcing that feeling of having an extraordinary opportunity so that it helps me stay the course, helps me build up a reserve so that I can carry on. Allan, do you want to add to that?
Well, actually, I want to second it very much. Actually, Pilar and I both teach at a large community here in New York City. And we often ask people, especially if we're meeting them for the first or second time, why they've actually started this practice, why they've started meditating. So often the answer is, well, my wife has insisted, or my therapist strongly recommends it. And those answers are not really motivation. And what we hope will happen is that with a little bit of time and a little bit of coming back, just enough perseverance to come back, that people, to put it bluntly, kind of get hooked on the practice and they want to continue. Because when one is motivated from within, in other words, it takes time to start to see something happen, to sense a difference. But you begin to get that feeling that I'm meditating, I'm practicing, I'm studying, because I'm beginning to sense that it's making a difference in my life. I think when it's just theoretical, or because a friend has really benefited from the practice, I don't know that it's strong enough. It's a good starting place. But as Pilar said, when motivation develops from within, it becomes very strong. So perseverance, we can come back to our starting place, perseverance and patience becomes so important, because the first, second time you sit down on a meditation cushion, or the 10th time, feelings of, why am I doing this? Nothing's happening. Well, maybe nothing's happening, and then suddenly something happens, and it's subtle. But one day, down the road, you suddenly think to yourself, I just handled that so much better than I would have a year ago. Isn't that interesting? Where did that come from? But yeah, finding one's own motivation, I think, is key, and it's individual. No one else can provide that for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Allan.
A little practice together.
Sure. We've got a few minutes, maybe just to sit together and
Pilar, would you like to lead us through that?
Sure, sure. This is going to be a very brief practice since I think we have less than 5 minutes, but that's all right. We can just take a few moments to enter into a sense of just allowing for your experience in this moment. And as a way to do that, you can just bring your awareness to the body. Noticing the breath. Noticing any sensations that fall on your attention. And as a way of nurturing that sacred space we've been exploring today, you can take a few full, deep breaths. Helping your body experience a sense of opening and spaciousness. And on the exhalation, helping both your mind and your body feel a sense of decompression, release. And then just allowing your breath to be completely spontaneous. And allowing any thoughts or feelings simply to arise. And perhaps to note them with a sense of gentle receptivity. Watching them subside as all feelings and thoughts will. And in these last few moments, perhaps setting the intention to continue cultivating the practice of patience for the benefit of all beings, including the people you love and the people you have yet to meet, and even the people with whom you've had difficulty or conflict. Trusting that this practice will generate well-being, healing, and ease. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jennings, Allan, Lokos.
Thank you very much for having us.
And thank you everyone who joined this gathering. Our next session is Thursday, September 10th with Victor Masayesva and Jonathan Rose. Please keep checking garrisoninstitute.org for updated listings of future sessions and to view the recording of this gathering and others. Again, we provide these sessions free of charge. If you would like to support this effort, please consider making a donation at garrisoninstitute.org. May everyone be happy, healthy, and safe.